This is the Fifth Estate, a conversation between young African scholars from the Fort Hall School of Government in Nairobi and Professor Mutahi Ngunyi. Here is the danger in the 2027 election no one is talking about. Have you wondered why the opposition is foot-dragging the naming of a single candidate? Is this deliberate, or is it a tactic? 1 year to the election, they have no unifying figure like Baba. Why? We have a hypothesis. What if the strategy is to choose the opposition candidate by forcing an election runoff? For those unfamiliar with the constitutional requirement, Kenya has never held a runoff. A runoff happens if the winner of the presidential election does not marshal 50% plus 1 of the total votes cast, or if he does not get at least 25% of the vote in 24 counties. Should this happen, the person who wins and the person who becomes second are sent back to the polls in 30 days. Then the voters are asked to choose which one of them should be president. Since opposition cannot agree on a candidate, is their strategy to field many candidates in order to force a runoff? Then, the candidate who emerges as number 2 to Ruto becomes the united opposition candidate. The candidate to fight Ruto in a run-off election. Is this the strategy of the opposition for 2027?
This 50% plus 1 rule produces knife-edge presidential outcomes we must pay attention to. In 2013, Uhuru crossed this line by only 62,000 votes. After the Supreme Court removed the spoiled votes from the total vote, this number dropped to 23,000 or so. In 2022, Ruto crossed this margin by only 69,000 votes. Raila had spent a few days in Kisumu, he could have raised these votes. And if he had, and denied Ruto the 50% plus 1 margin, the runoff election would have produced different results. Maybe Baba Man would have become president and lived. But he did not see the 50% plus 1 as an opponent he needed to beat. In 2027, Ruto's only opponent will be the 50% plus 1 constitutional rule. This is the guy he should fight using every means available to him. If he does not cross this margin, and a repeat election is called against a united opposition, he will have a problem. It will show that he is not as strong as he seems, and a groundswell could happen against him in favor of opposition. This is what happened in Liberia during the 2005 election. In the October first round, George Weah beat Ellen Sirleaf Johnson. But in the November 2005 runoff, there was a realignment of opposition, and Ellen Johnson beat Weah. This is how Johnson became president of Liberia.
In the Liberian election of 2005, there were 20 presidential candidates with ethnic appeal. They stretched the electorate in all directions, and George Weah finished first, at 28% of the vote and 19% for Sirleaf Johnson. In the runoff election, however, all warlords, including Charles Taylor's wife, ganged up against Weah. Then he lost. If Ruto does not treat the 50% plus 1 rule as his main opponent, tables could turn on him. But is opposition foolish enough to field 20 candidates with ethnic appeal in order to force a runoff like Liberians did in 2005? Have they bought the idea that opposition unity is nothing but political nonsense? Zero. Or maybe they will be forced to pursue their separate ways by the gods. This way, a united opposition candidate to fight Ruto in a runoff will be imposed on them by the voters during the first round of voting. And maybe this will work. However, there is a problem here. What guarantees do they have going separately against Ruto will result in a runoff? What if it does not play out the way it did in Liberia? And let's assume a runoff actually happens. What guarantees do we have that they will stick together to fight Ruto? Zero. If they cannot hang together today, they will be hanged separately in a runoff.
Allow us to demonstrate the power of a runoff election and why Ruto should watch it. In the 2022 election, one faction of the Uhuru Raila brigade argued that the only way to beat Ruto was to subject him to a runoff. But the Central Command at Harambee House overruled this strategy. They wanted Raila to win using the 50% plus one route. The strategy, as Ruto became too strong for Raila, was to prop up a candidate who would garner enough votes to force a runoff. And the state-appointed candidate was Wajakoya. It is on public record. The idea was to make Wajakoya unconventional and viral. Have him inspire young people to breed hyenas because one testicle of a hyena would give its farmer 600K. And a hyena has 2 testicles. Inspire farmers to breed snakes because snake poison can cure cancer. And have Kikuyu farmers grow bangi because if Nyeri County did this for 1 year only, we would have cleared our national debt. This was the narrative strategy crafted by the state to grow Wajakoya. But it was killed before it peaked. If Ruto crossed the 50% plus one margin by 69,000 votes, Wajakoya would have denied him this victory if supported by the state. Then, we would have had a runoff between Ruto and Raila, and the results would have been different.
Now we will conclude. Can the opposition force a runoff? Absolutely not. Or maybe they will be forced by the gods to run separately and force a runoff. But if this happens, they still have a puzzle to solve. How did Ruto beat Raila and Uhuru in 2022? If Ruto could beat them and beat the 50% plus one, what is a runoff for him? Ruto will not rely on the big tribes to win. He will use what we have numerously called the tyranny of small numbers. This is what will take him beyond the 50% plus one threshold. He will use voter turnout as the differential. Kikuyus from Nyeri, Murang'a, Kirinyaga, and Kiambu have already given up on 2027. Their turnout will be low. Their total vote is currently at around 2 million. If they have a 40% turnout, their votes will be 800,000. Projected IEBC figures for Garissa, Wajir, and Mandera is also 2 million voters. If they have a 60% turnout, this will be 1.4 million votes. Ruto will use turnout to boost these numbers from small communities. And he will use the mobile polling stations enacted in law to collect these small numbers. If you have 20 presidential candidates and 2,000 mobile polling stations in remote areas, how will opposition send agents to monitor them? They should just give up.